What are you doing dressed like that?
What are you
Korean
doing
Mafia
dressed
boss
like that?
demanded when his
I was
black maid
hoping
walked
you'd
in wearing
notice.
a blue dress. Her reply changed everything. Enter. Kim Hyun-woo's voice sliced through the silence like a blade against my throat. On the other side of the door, I gripped the hem of the blue dress. My armor, my risk, my rebellion. 6 months of invisibility were about to end. 6 months of yes, sir, and no, sir, and pretending I couldn't understand when his associate spoke Mandarin or Cantonese, assuming the black maid couldn't possibly comprehend their secrets. 6 months of being nothing. My doctorate from Oxford meant nothing here. My 7 languages meant nothing. The scholarship revocation that destroyed my future, that cruel email citing funding limitations that somehow only affected certain international students, had reduced me to this, standing outside a monster's door in a dress I shouldn't be wearing, about to commit what might be career suicide, or actual suicide depending on his mood. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door. Time froze. Kim Hyun-woo looked up from his desk, his obsidian eyes widening just a fraction. The equivalent of shocked disbelief from Seoul's most feared man. His body went completely still with the predatory stillness of a tiger about to pounce. What are you doing dressed like that? Each word fell like a stone into still water, ripples of threat expanding outward. Here it was, the moment I'd rehearsed all night, the moment I either reclaimed my dignity or signed my death warrant. I straightened my spine, met his eyes directly, another unforgivable breach of protocol, and spoke in perfect, formal Korean. I'm not just your maid today, I'm your translator. Your Chinese business partners don't speak English or Korean. The rage that flashed across Kim's face would have made smarter people run. But I was done running, done hiding, done pretending to be less than I was. In 6 months, I'd seen 3 people disappear after provoking these exact reactions. 3 people who underestimated how quickly his control could snap. His right hand flexed once, twice. The vein in his temple pulsed. Death or acceptance hung in the air between us. And then he did something I never expected. He smiled. It wasn't warmth. Nothing so human or comforting. It was the smile of a predator discovering unexpected complexity in prey it had previously dismissed. A smile that recalculated value and potential use. A smile that made my skin prickle with warning even as relief flooded through me. I wasn't going to die. Not today. The Lu delegation arrives in 20 minutes, he said, closing the file before him. If you're as good as you claim to be, I expect perfection. He gestured to a chair positioned near his at the conference table. Not equal, but not servant distant either. Sit. Prepare. I had 20 minutes to review documents I'd never seen, to anticipate negotiations I'd never been briefed on, to prepare for a financial discussion with terms I'd have to translate on the fly. 20 minutes to prove I was more than the invisible woman who'd been pouring his tea for half a year. The Lu delegation comprised 3 stern-faced businessmen and 1 sharp-eyed woman whose Mandarin carried the distinctive accent of northern China. They looked through me initially, another pretty accessory in Kim's intimidating arsenal, until I greeted them in flawless Mandarin, noting the northern pronunciation and adjusting my dialect accordingly. The woman's eyes sharpened, reassessing me with sudden interest. What followed was the most intense 3 hours of my professional life. The meeting wasn't just about translation, it was about understanding the nuances, the cultural implications, the hidden agendas beneath seemingly straightforward business terms. It was about catching the slight hesitation when the primary negotiator mentioned production timelines, about noticing how the woman's eyes narrowed at specific contract clauses. They're lying about the production capacity, I murmured to Kim in Korean during a brief pause. The woman keeps glancing at Lu whenever he mentions the Shenzhen facility. They can't meet the timeline they're promising. Kim's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted slightly, the barest acknowledgement of my insight. When negotiations resumed, he pressed harder on the production timeline, demanding specific commitments, proof of capability, penalty clauses. The delegates exchanged glances, recalibrating their strategy. By the end of the meeting, Kim had secured terms that would have been impossible without the information I'd provided. The blue silk whispered against my skin with every movement, a reminder of the life I should have had, the life where my mind mattered more than my ability to pour tea without being seen. This dress had cost me 3 months' savings. 3 months of setting aside small amounts from my salary, hiding the money in a hollowed-out book of Ghanaian poetry my grandmother had given me before I left for Oxford. A book that was one of the few possessions I'd managed to keep during my precipitous fall from academia to domestic service. I still remember the day the email arrived, terminating my scholarship. I was 2 years into my doctoral program, praised by professors, published in linguistics journals, invited to present at conferences across Europe. My research on comparative syntax across West African and East Asian languages had attracted attention from scholars worldwide. My future seemed set. A prestigious academic career, respect, legitimacy. The email was brief, bureaucratic, final. Due to funding limitations, my scholarship had been revoked, effective immediately. No appeals process. No alternative funding offered. Just sudden academic death, delivered between a cafeteria lunch announcement and a reminder about library book returns. Later, I learned I wasn't the only one. 6 international students, all from countries Oxford deemed challenging diplomatic relationships, all highly accomplished, all suddenly unfunded, their academic careers terminated with identical emails sent within the same hour. The memory of that day, of standing in my small graduate housing flat, staring at my computer screen, unable to breathe, flashed through my mind as I sat in Kim Hyun-woo's office, translating million-dollar negotiations. The bitter symmetry wasn't lost on me. There, I'd been eliminated because I was too foreign, too black, too inconvenient for whatever political winds were blowing. Here, I was useful precisely because of my foreignness, my languages, my ability to navigate worlds that weren't mine. When the investors left, I waited for the fallout. Kim said nothing for 6 endless minutes. He simply studied me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, or perhaps a problem requiring elimination. I didn't fidget under his gaze. I'd endured worse scrutiny from Oxford admission committees, from immigration officials, from landlords reluctant to rent to a black foreign student. At least Kim's assessment was straightforward. Was I useful or not? 7 languages, he finally said. Yes. Oxford. Yes. And you've been serving tea in my home for 6 months. Yes. His fingers drummed once against the mahogany desk, the only sign of emotion in a man carved from ice. Why? The question surprised me. I'd expected dismissal or approval, not curiosity. Because my visa was expiring. Because no university would hire me without official completion of my doctorate. Because your organization was willing to sponsor a work visa without asking too many questions. Because the salary was triple what any other household staff position offered. I met his eyes directly. I'm not a fool, Mr. Kim. I knew something wasn't right about the position, but desperation limits choices. And today? Why reveal yourself now? Because I'm tired of being invisible. Because I'm worth more than what you've been using me for. A flicker of something, not quite respect, but adjacent to it, crossed his face. The blue suits you, he said finally. Wear it again tomorrow. The Taiwanese delegation arrives at noon. Just like that, my role changed. Not through kindness or fairness or recognition of my qualifications, but through utility. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. My education, my brilliance, my years of study. None of it mattered until it served a powerful man's interests. When I returned to my small room in the staff quarters that evening, something had shifted in the household's atmosphere. News traveled fast in a place built on surveillance and whispers. The maid who shared the adjacent room no longer met my eyes. The kitchen staff fell silent when I entered to prepare my simple dinner. The security guards tracked my movements with new attention, not as furniture to be ignored, but as an anomaly to be monitored. I ate alone, as I always did, at the small table in the staff dining area. 6 months, and I'd never formed connections with the other household employees. Partly language barriers, most spoke only Korean, and I'd pretended my grasp of the language was minimal. Partly deliberate isolation. I sensed from the beginning that friendships in this house could become liabilities. But mostly the unbridgeable gap between our realities. They were career domestic staff. I was an academic in exile, temporarily trapped in their world but not of it. That night, I carefully hung the blue dress in my small closet, smoothing the wrinkles, positioning it where I could see it from my bed. A reminder that I'd existed today, that I'd been seen. that I'd spoken in my true voice for the first time in half a year. The whispers started immediately. The staff watched me with suspicious eyes. Min-ho, Kim's second-in-command, tracked my movements with thinly veiled hostility. "You should have stayed invisible," he told me one evening, cornering me in the kitchen. "The things you hear in those meetings, they're not meant for outsiders." "I'm not an outsider," I replied, though the words felt hollow even to me. "You're not one of us?" Min-ho clarified, his smile sharp as broken glass. "You never will be." He wasn't wrong. I existed in a liminal space, no longer a servant, not yet accepted. The blue dress became both symbol and target. I wore it to meetings, negotiations, business dinners. Kim never praised my work directly, but I noticed how he increasingly positioned me closer to him, how his questions became more complex, testing the limits of my knowledge. 2 weeks after my transformation from maid to translator, I was summoned to Kim's private office. Not the business suite where meetings were held, but his personal workspace deep within the mansion. The room was surprisingly austere for a man of his wealth and power. No ostentatious displays, no gilded furnishings or gaudy status symbols. Just clean lines, functional luxury, and walls lined with books in multiple languages. "Your Korean is native level," he said without preamble as I entered. "Yes, which means you've understood every conversation in this house for the past 6 months." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, including discussions about business matters that could get people killed if leaked to the wrong parties." The threat was implicit but clear. I'd known too much for too long. I was a security risk. My usefulness as a translator might not outweigh the danger of my accumulated knowledge. "I've never spoken to anyone outside this house," I said carefully. "Not about the business. Not about anything. Because you have no one to talk to." The statement was matter-of-fact, not cruel. A simple observation based on the surveillance that I'd always assumed surrounded me. "Yes." He studied me for a long moment, then pushed a file across his desk. "The Japanese consortium is offering a partnership. Their proposal is intentionally complicated. Legal terms buried in technical specifications, obligations hidden in appendices. Find the traps." It was a test, not of my language skills, but of my loyalty, my discretion, my willingness to actively serve his interests rather than merely translate words. I spent 3 hours dissecting the document, identifying 7 concealed clauses that would have given the Japanese partners control over key elements of the proposed joint venture. When I presented my findings, Kim listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "You have a lawyer's mind," he said when I finished. "I have a linguist's mind," I corrected. "I recognize patterns. I see connections between seemingly unrelated elements. I understand how meaning can be manipulated through structure." For the first time, I saw something like genuine interest in his eyes, not just assessment of my utility, but curiosity about my capabilities. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll join the executive meeting, not as translator, as analyst." The executive meeting was the inner sanctum of Kim's operation. 8 men who controlled various aspects of his business empire, both legitimate and shadow. I would be the first woman ever admitted to this circle, the first foreigner, the first person without years of proven loyalty or family connections. The blue dress wasn't enough for such an occasion. That evening, I used my newly increased salary, quietly doubled without discussion, to order a blue suit, tailored and professional. When it arrived the next morning, delivered by a nervous maid who wouldn't meet my eyes, I understood it for what it was: battle armor. The men's faces when I entered the conference room ranged from shock to outrage to contemptuous amusement. Min-ho's expression was the most dangerous: cold calculation, reassessment, the look of a man plotting new strategies. "Mr. Kim," he said carefully, "is this appropriate? The matters we discuss here are sensitive." "Miss Johnson has already been privy to most of these matters," Kim replied calmly. "The difference is that now she'll contribute her insights openly rather than eavesdropping while serving tea." The blunt acknowledgement of my previous role, and the implication that I'd been gathering intelligence all along, sent a ripple of discomfort around the table. I felt their stares like physical contact, assessing, measuring, calculating the threat I represented. For 2 hours I sat silently, absorbing information about shell companies, property acquisitions, political influence campaigns, and carefully sanitized references to operations that were clearly illegal. I understood now why Minho had warned me about knowing too much. This wasn't just business. This was power, manipulation, control of Seoul's underworld disguised as corporate strategy. The Lu contract, Kim said, turning to me unexpectedly. Your assessment? 8 pairs of eyes fixed on me. 8 powerful men waiting for me to fail, to prove I didn't belong in their rarefied circle. The manufacturing capacity issue is a smokescreen, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Based on their negotiation patterns and the documents they provided, their real concern is the intellectual property transfer. They want access to the pharmaceutical formulations without the licensing restrictions. The production timeline delays are a negotiating tactic to distract from their true objective. Silence greeted my analysis. Then Kim nodded once, the barest acknowledgement, but in this room with these men, it might as well have been effusive praise. Restructure the contract, he told his legal director. Strengthen the IP protections. Offer concessions on the timeline penalties. Just like that, my assessment became policy. My insight translated directly to action. For the first time since losing my academic future, I felt the familiar rush of intellectual recognition, the validation that my mind was my most valuable asset. The first time I saved his life, it was almost by accident. 3 weeks after the blue dress incident, Kim hosted a business dinner. I was refilling wine glasses when I overheard 2 Taiwanese men speaking in rapid Mandarin, their voices low and urgent. The contract is a distraction. Chen's men are already in position. Kim won't leave this building alive. My heart pounded louder than my footsteps as I moved to his chair and bent as though to refill his glass. Assassination attempt. Chen's men. We need to leave. Now. Our eyes met for one electric second. Without question, he stood, made a casual announcement, and his hand closed around my wrist as we slipped through a service door just as the first gunshots shattered the evening's civility. The safe room was hidden behind a false wall, a space designed for one person, not 2. My cheek pressed against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat while chaos erupted above us. For a monster, he felt surprisingly human. The gunfire lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes of pressed together in darkness, his arm around my waist to keep me steady in the cramped space, my breath matching the rhythm of his. I could smell his cologne. Subtle, expensive, with notes of cedar and bergamot. Could feel the fine wool of his suit against my skin. Could sense the controlled tension in every muscle of his body. Security protocols required 30 minutes in the safe room regardless of external situation. So for 18 minutes after the gunfire stopped, after we heard the distinctive footsteps and voice confirmations of his security team clearing the building, we remained locked together in that intimate darkness. Why? He asked after 17 minutes of silence. Why save me? I knew what he was asking. Why protect the man who'd reduced me to a servant when I should have been lecturing in universities? I don't know, I answered honestly. You could have walked away. Been free of this place. I laughed, the sound hollow in the confined space. Free? A black immigrant woman with an expired visa and no references? Where exactly would I go? Anywhere would be better than here. Would it? I searched his face in the dim emergency lighting. I've tried anywhere before. At least here I have a roof and food and safety. Safety. He repeated the word like it tasted foreign on his tongue. You think you're safe with me? I think you're safer than the alternatives. Something shifted in his expression then. Something almost like respect. Almost like recognition. As though he finally saw me not just as a tool but as a person making difficult choices in an unforgiving world. The next day, I was moved from staff quarters to a guest suite in the family wing. My few possessions, books mostly, the small collection of academic journals I'd managed to keep, the framed photo of my grandmother in her academic robes from her own university days in Accra, looked absurdly inadequate in the spacious suite with its private bathroom, sitting area, and balcony overlooking the estate's immaculate gardens. The blue dress multiplied into blue suits, blue blouses, blue accessories, an unspoken uniform that marked my new position, something between employee and confidant. something with no name or precedent in Kim's carefully ordered world. The household staff now openly avoided me. The security team maintained professional distance, but with a new undercurrent of deference. Minho's hostility transformed from dismissive contempt to focused animosity. Only Kim's behavior remained consistent, coolly professional, demanding, expecting excellence without explicitly acknowledging it. He's never kept one this long, Minho told me one afternoon, words dripping with insinuation. A pet project, a distraction, whatever you are. Don't get comfortable. When he gets bored, you'll disappear like all the others. His eyes tracked the blue scarf at my throat like it was a target. Is that a threat, Mr. Min? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. An observation. His smile never reached his eyes. You're useful now, entertaining even. But Mr. Kim doesn't form attachments, especially not to temporary assets. The word choice wasn't accidental. In this world, assets could be liquidated when no longer valuable, could be written off as acceptable losses, could disappear without questions or consequences. I maintained my composure until he left, then allowed myself 5 minutes of pure, unfiltered panic in the privacy of my suite. 5 minutes to acknowledge the precariousness of my position, the danger inherent in catching Kim Hyun-woo's attention, the reality that I was playing a game whose rules I barely understood with players who had spent lifetimes mastering its brutal logic. Then I dried my eyes, straightened my blue jacket, and returned to work. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when my only protection was continued usefulness. Not when visibility so recently achieved could so easily become a liability. I immersed myself in Kim's business operations, learning the complex web of his legitimate enterprises, pharmaceuticals, technology, real estate, and the shadowy networks that supported them. I studied the power dynamics of Seoul's underworld, the rival organizations, the political connections, the intricate dance of threat and accommodation that maintained equilibrium in a world built on controlled violence. Knowledge was protection. Understanding was armor. If I was to survive in this new role, I needed both in abundance. 2 months after the assassination attempt, Kim summoned me to his private study at midnight. I'd been reviewing pharmaceutical patents for an upcoming negotiation, annotating the complex technical language with translations and strategic notes. The late summons wasn't unusual. Kim kept irregular hours, often working until dawn, but the location suggested a more personal interaction than our typical business discussions. His study was dimly lit, the room's rich wood paneling absorbing the soft lamplight. He sat not at his desk but in one of 2 leather chairs positioned near the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The setting felt deliberately intimate, almost staged. "Join me," he said, gesturing to the second chair. I sat cautiously, hyper-aware of the unusual scenario. Kim and I didn't have conversations. We had working sessions, strategy discussions, business interactions. We didn't sit by fireplaces sharing drinks like equals or friends. "Your file says you're from Ghana originally," he said, surprising me with the personal direction. "Yes, Accra." "Your family?" "My grandmother raised me. She was a professor of literature at the University of Ghana." "Was?" "She died during my 2nd year at Oxford." The memory still carried a sharp edge of pain. The funeral I couldn't attend because I couldn't afford the flight home. The books and papers I'd inherited but couldn't retrieve. The last living connection to my past severed while I was building my future. "No other family?" "No." He nodded slightly, absorbing this information. "My family built this," he said after a moment, gesturing vaguely to encompass not just the room but the entire empire it represented. 3 generations. My grandfather started with nothing after the war. Built a smuggling operation. My father expanded into legitimate businesses, created respectability, political connections. I've taken it further, international partnerships, technology investments, pharmaceutical patents. It was more personal history than he'd ever shared, and I wasn't sure how to respond. "It's impressive," I said finally. "It's a prison," he replied, surprising me again. "Every move calculated for its effect on the organization. Every relationship evaluated for potential benefit or threat. Every person categorized as asset or liability." "Including me?" The question slipped out before I could censor it. His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable in the low light. You defy categorization, Ms. Johnson. That's what makes you dangerous. I'm not a threat to you. Everyone is a threat to someone in my position. He fell silent then, swirling the liquid in his glass, seemingly lost in thought. I waited, sensing there was purpose behind this unusual conversation, this unprecedented glimpse into his interior landscape. The Chun organization has made overtures, he said finally. They want peace after their failed assassination attempt. They're offering concessions, territory, favorable terms. You don't trust them. I don't trust anyone. He smiled slightly, the expression more grimace than humor. But in this case, their offer appears genuine. They've been weakened by internal conflicts. They need stability to rebuild. Then why the hesitation? Because the peace proposal includes a marriage alliance. Chen's niece, 22 years old, MBA from Wharton, impeccable family connections. The implication hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. A political marriage, a business arrangement disguised as personal union, a traditional method of cementing alliances between powerful families. Congratulations, I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the unexpected hollowness that opened in my chest. It sounds advantageous. It would be, he agreed, except for one complication. His eyes held mine, and something electric passed between us. Something never acknowledged during our months of working proximity, something I'd carefully avoided examining too closely. What complication? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. You. The word hung between us, laden with implications that neither of us seemed prepared to articulate. I broke eye contact first, looking down at my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I'm your employee, Mr. Kim, your translator, your analyst. I'm not a complication unless you make me one. You saved my life, he said softly. You've seen parts of my operation that no outsider should ever witness. You know enough to destroy me if you chose to. And yet I continue to bring you closer, to share more, to trust you with increasingly sensitive information. He set his glass down with deliberate care. If that's not a complication, I don't know what is. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed with the specific pattern that indicated security alerts. The moment, whatever it had been building toward, shattered as he answered, his expression shifting instantly from vulnerable openness to cold command. When? He demanded of the caller. How many? Secure the perimeter. Full lockdown protocols. No one in or out until I give direct clearance. He ended the call and stood in one fluid motion. We have a security breach. Stay here. This room is the most secure in the house. And he was gone, leaving me alone with a half-finished conversation and questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The poisoning attempt came 3 months after the blue dress incident. A cup of tea delivered to my room. A special blend, the maid said, requested by Kim himself. I might have believed it if not for the slight bitter scent that didn't belong. If not for the fact that Kim never did anything through intermediaries when it came to me. I didn't drink it. Instead, I confronted Min-ho directly, walking into his office with the cup in hand, placing it carefully on his desk. If you're going to kill me, I said calmly, at least be original about it. The rage that contorted his features confirmed everything. He lunged across the desk, hands reaching for my throat, only to be interrupted by the door slamming open with such force the hinges cracked. Kim Hyun-woo stood in the doorway, and the cold fury in his eyes made my breath catch. Not because it was directed at me, but because it wasn't. Because it burned with protective rage that I'd never seen from anyone. Not in all my years of fighting to belong in spaces that rejected me. What followed was both terrible and illuminating. Kim's violence was not chaotic or uncontrolled. It was precise, methodical, almost elegant in its brutality. He didn't kill Min-ho. That might have been Kinder. Instead, he systematically destroyed him. Physically, psychologically, professionally. Forced confessions of long-term betrayals. Extracted information about contacts with rival organizations. Dismantled the man's carefully constructed power base within the organization in a matter of minutes. I watched it all without flinching, without intervening. This was the world I'd entered when I put on that blue dress. This was the man I'd tied my fate to. There was no pretending otherwise. When it was over, when Min-ho had been dragged away by security, Kim turned to me with blood on his knuckles and something unreadable in his eyes. "Pack your things," he said, voice flat. My heart plummeted. So Min-ho had been right after all. I'd outlived my usefulness. The complication I represented was being eliminated. "I understand," I said, forcing dignity into my voice despite the crushing disappointment. "I'll be gone by morning." "No." Kim stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "Pack your things because I'm moving you to the family residence. The main house isn't secure enough anymore." Relief flooded me so intensely I almost swayed on my feet. "Not rejection, protection. You're keeping me then?" The words slipped out before I could censor them. Something like pain crossed his features. "I'm not keeping you. You're not a possession, Amara. You're—" He paused, seemingly at a loss for how to define what I'd become to him. "You're important. Important." Such a small word for the seismic shift it represented. Important meant valuable beyond function. Important meant irreplaceable. But important also meant target. Vulnerable point. Weakness. The family residence was a fortress disguised as a traditional hanok on the outskirts of Seoul. Ancient architecture concealing state-of-the-art security. Peaceful gardens hiding escape routes and safe rooms. I was installed in the East Wing with access codes, security clearance, and explicit instructions never to leave without protection. Here, away from the business headquarters and the main estate, the rigid boundaries between us began to blur. We took meals together in the small dining room overlooking the garden. Discussed business as equals in the library, surrounded by rare books and antique maps. Spent evenings in companionable silence, Kim reviewing reports while I devoured volumes from his extensive multilingual collection. The first time he touched me without utility or necessity. A brush of fingers against my wrist as he handed me a cup of tea. The contact sent electricity skittering across my skin. The first time I made him laugh. A genuine sound, surprised out of him by my dry observation about a particularly pompous business associate. The transformation in his face stole my breath. Slowly, cautiously, we circled each other, testing boundaries, discovering limits. Kim remained a man of contradictions. Capable of ruthless violence in business, yet unexpectedly gentle in private moments. I remained watchful, protective of my newfound position, unwilling to risk the fragile trust building between us. One evening, as rain drummed against the traditional tile roof, Kim spoke of his childhood. The strict father who showed affection only through grudging approval of business acumen. The mother who retreated into pills and silence. The relentless preparation for a role he never chose but couldn't escape. "Did you ever want something different?" I asked, curled in a chair across from him, the blue cashmere of my sweater soft against my skin. "Wanting doesn't matter in my world," he replied. "There is duty. There is family. There is legacy. Personal desire is irrelevant." "That sounds like a prison." "It is," he smiled faintly, "but a gilded one. Even gilded prisons have doors." He looked at me then with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Something between yearning and resignation. "Some doors are locked from the outside, Amara. Some paths are chosen for us before we're born. And some locks can be picked," I countered softly. "Some paths can be reforged." He didn't respond, but something shifted in the atmosphere between us. A possibility opening, a future glimpsed. A door previously thought locked revealing the faintest crack of light. But nothing gold can stay in a world built on violence. I had gone to the main estate to retrieve documents from Kim's study, a rare solo excursion, but one deemed safe enough given the increased security following Min-ho's removal. I never made it to the study. 6 men, professional, efficient, waiting in the blind spot between security cameras. A cloth over my mouth. Darkness. I woke in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, the distant sound of water suggesting proximity to the river. My wrists were bound with zip ties, tight enough to cut into flesh. The concrete floor beneath me was damp and cold, the air heavy with mold and something metallic, blood, maybe, or the residue of industrial chemicals. My captors talked nearby, their voices low but clear. Chun says we wait for confirmation before proceeding. Kim will pay whatever we ask. He's gone soft over this woman. If he doesn't pay, then we send her back in pieces and take what we want anyway. Fear clawed at my throat, primal and overwhelming. But beneath it burned fury. Fury that once again, my worth was being measured by my usefulness to men. Fury that my hard-won position could be reduced to Kim's woman. Fury that after everything, the education I'd fought for, the languages I'd mastered, the careful navigation of Kim's dangerous world, I could still be treated as nothing more than collateral. They'd underestimated me. They all did eventually. They didn't know I spoke Cantonese. Didn't know I'd spent 6 months in Kim's household, learning the rhythms and protocols of his security operations. Didn't know I'd been paying attention. Help! I called out in Cantonese, voice trembling with calculated distress. Please, I need water. I'm going to be sick. The younger guard approached, wary but not particularly concerned. A bound woman was hardly a threat. Please, I repeated, switching to Mandarin. I have medicine in my pocket. For my heart. I need it. Confusion flickered across his face. I wasn't supposed to understand their language. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. As he leaned closer, I whipped my head forward, connecting with his nose in a sickening crunch. The commotion brought the others running. I was already moving, rolling to my feet despite the awkward angle of my bound hands. I'd watched Kim's security team train enough to know the weak points: throat, knees, groin. Had watched enough fights to understand that precision mattered more than strength. I didn't win, not exactly. 4 against 1 were impossible odds. But I created enough chaos, enough disruption to alter the careful timeline of the kidnapping. By the time they subdued me again, alarms were blaring, security protocols triggered, the element of surprise lost. They were dragging me toward an exit when the first explosion rocked the building. The wall disintegrated in a shower of concrete and metal. Through the dust and debris, Kim Hyun-woo walked like an avenging spirit, surrounded by his elite security team. What followed wasn't a rescue so much as an execution. Clinical, efficient, absolute. The men who had taken me, men who had calculated my value in terms of ransom, who had discussed dismembering me as casually as ordering lunch, fell one by one. No dramatic standoffs. No cinematic last stands, just the cold reality of power differentials in a world without rules. When it was over, when the warehouse had fallen silent except for the crackle of spreading flames, Kim crossed to where I stood. Without speaking, he cut the zip ties from my wrists, his movements gentle despite the blood staining his clothes. Then, to the shock of his watching men, he knelt before me, head bowed. His hands, those hands that had just ended lives, trembled as they held mine. Forgive me, he said, voice raw. I failed to protect you. The sight of Kim Hyun-woo, feared crime lord, ruthless businessman, man who never bowed to anyone, kneeling at my feet sent something like vertigo spinning through me. Get up, I whispered, acutely aware of the watching eyes. Please, get up. He rose slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. This ends now, he said, no longer speaking to me but to himself. All of it. The shadow operations. The illegal trade routes. Everything that puts you at risk. You can't dismantle an empire overnight, I said, practical despite the shock still vibrating through my system. Watch me. That night, as medical staff treated my wrists and the bruises blooming across my ribs, Kim laid out his plan. Kim Enterprises would transition to fully legitimate operations over the next 18 months. Shadow Dragon would be dismantled piece by piece, territory ceded to rivals under careful negotiations, illegal operations shut down or converted. Why now? I asked, wincing as antiseptic stung raw flesh. You've built this empire over decades. Why throw it away? Kim looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Because I found something worth more. The words hung between us, laden with implications neither was ready to voice. I had spent too many years being disappointed by promises, by potential, by possibilities that evaporated like morning dew. Kim had spent too many years burying emotion beneath calculated control. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything, I said finally. You're the reason I might finally gain something that matters. The transformation began immediately. I drafted international transition plans, using my languages and diplomatic skills to navigate the complex web of relationships. I created legitimization strategies for salvageable operations, identifying which businesses could be converted to legal enterprises and which needed to be abandoned entirely. I developed communication frameworks for employees, partners, and rivals, carefully crafted messaging that presented the transformation as strategic evolution rather than retreat. Kim executed the strategic dismantling of criminal operations with the same precision he'd once used to build them. Rivals received territory with specific conditions. Loyal lieutenants were offered positions in the restructured organization or generous retirement packages. Political connections were leveraged to smooth the transition, to prevent legal complications, to ensure the metamorphosis from shadow empire to legitimate corporation proceeded without crippling obstacles. But the most dangerous opposition came from within Kim's own family. His uncle, Park Sung-ho, patriarch of the family and founder of the original crime syndicate, returned from self-imposed exile in Japan when whispers of Kim's transformation reached him. Park Sung-ho arrived at the family residence unannounced, an old man with a young man's dangerous energy, surrounded by loyal retainers who eyed Kim's security with open hostility. I watched from the shadows as he swept into the house like an invading general, dismissing staff, issuing commands as though he still ruled the family empire. Their confrontation took place in the family residence, in the very room where I had begun to believe I might find belonging. I wasn't meant to witness it, wasn't meant to hear the ugly truths laid bare. But the old house carried voices, and I had spent a lifetime learning to listen from shadows. You would destroy everything we built for a foreign whore? Park's voice, cold and dismissive. A black servant who spread her legs and made you weak? Do not speak of her again. Kim's voice, deadly quiet. Not ever. You forget yourself, boy. I made you. I can unmake you just as easily. You made nothing. You ran when things became difficult. You left me to clean up your messes, to rebuild what your recklessness nearly destroyed. I turned your street gang into an empire, and now I'm turning that empire into something that will outlast us both. Because of her. The contempt in Park's voice made me flinch even from my hiding place. Because she's filled your head with weakness, with legitimacy, with playing by rules made to keep people like us down. No, because I'm tired of living in darkness. Because I want something more than power built on fear. The silence that followed felt like the pause before an execution. When Park spoke again, his voice had changed. No longer angry, but cold with certainty. Choose then, her or your family, her or your birthright, her or the blood that runs in your veins. I didn't wait to hear Kim's answer. Couldn't bear to be the thing that separated him from his heritage, his family, his identity. I slipped away silently, packed only what I had brought originally to the estate, and disappeared into the night. 3 days I managed to evade him. 3 days of cheap hotels and constant movement, using every trick I'd learned from watching Kim's security operations. 3 days of grief so profound it felt like dying, of second-guessing my decision, of wondering if I'd thrown away my one chance at belonging. On the 4th day, he found me. I opened my hotel room door to find Kim Hyun-woo standing in the hallway, looking unlike himself in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. No security detail, no imposing presence. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. You left, he said simply. I heard what Park said.